Hey everybody, it's Matt Johnston with the Johnston Business Law Group, and I am here with my colleagues Laura Swinchock and Jennifer Goldstein, who we're going to be talking about the Alec Baldwin case. Many of you may have seen stuff going on in the news related to Mr. Baldwin and his, shall we say, adventures on his movie set. We're going to be talking about some civil liability matters, but not what you may be thinking. So before we get started, I would like to ask everybody to quickly subscribe to our channel. You can hit the little button down below. And if you want to get a notice when we have posted new content, that little bell that you see down there, that can also be hit and you'll get a notice when we do that. So I'm going to allow Jen to sort of set up the case, and then we'll talk about what's going on and some lessons for employers. Jen?
So this is what we know from all of the news articles out there so far. We know that Alec Baldwin was on the set of a movie called Rust in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and that he is one of the top movie producers and has a production company. It's one of the top producers for the movie Rust, and that on the set of the movie, he was told that a prop gun was cold, and then during a scene, aimed it as part of the scene and discharged the prop gun. It went off. It turned out to be a real bullet, and it killed the film's cinematographer and injured the film's director. And while Alec Baldwin has come out and publicly acknowledged that he's distraught over the incident, he is one of the top producers, so there is definitely, his production company has some civil liability here. We've been told through the news that there were 3 prior accidental discharges that happened on the set, and also that there was no real form of orientation, and that there had been prior reports of accidental firings and various safety issues. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Laura to discuss negligent hiring and your duties as an employer.
Thanks, Jen. So focusing on both negligent hiring in this case, and then also a spin on negligent retention, which is very similar. But under most state laws, an employer does have an obligation to use reasonable care in selecting and retaining its employees. So an employer can violate this duty when it hires or retains an employee that it knows or should have known is unfit or incompetent to perform the work required. And so at a high level, often employers will do background checks when they're going to hire someone, maybe a criminal history check, different things to make sure that the person they're bringing on board is in fact qualified and competent to perform those duties. Now, when you look at this particular case, we know that the situation is obviously involving the gun discharging and killing one of the individuals, injuring another. And we look at then the head armorer in that case, because that individual, she would have been responsible for the weapons on the movie set. So from what we read, we know that from her, she really learned this role from her father, who I guess worked in the movie industry for years as a firearms expert, but that she had just finished a production prior to this one in the head armorer role, but it seemed like her experience was very limited. And, in this, obviously we're going what's on the news and we're trying to pull information that's publicly available. So I couldn't help myself because I'm not familiar with an armorer role and what are qualifications for that. So I just did a quick search, ZipRecruiter, right? Just what are the qualifications for an armorer? So it said that the individual needs to have a variety of qualifications and skills related to firearms. Makes sense. Some positions may require certifications from gun manufacturers in how to use and maintain those specific make of weapons. And additionally, the individual needs to be extremely detail-oriented and aware of gun safety protocols. So when you read it, I guess when I read it, all things you would expect, at least at a high level, right? From the lay person. Now we're obviously speculating on the details and this individual's qualifications, but with the limited information we have, it does seem that you could say the employer had some liability here on the true competence and the qualifications of that head armorer employee. And so ultimately, the production really, as the employer, has a duty to exercise that reasonable care to select employees that are competent and fit to the work assigned. And I think that could really call into question whether they did that or not in this case. So I think that's one aspect here. But then when I looked at the facts and some of the pieces you pulled out, Jen, when you look at the negligent retention aspect, so very similar in the hiring, but obviously it's the difference of when the employer maybe knew or should have known that the employee became unfit for duty. So let's assume that the armorer was in fact qualified, was competent, the employer met their obligation in the hiring process. Well, then you could look at other factors to say, okay, when they were actually on board, at some point, did you know that they then became unfit to do that role? And so here, when I look at it, what you had pointed out, right? We know that a crew member maybe texted a unit production manager saying that they've had the 3 accidental discharges even prior to the incident that we're talking about here. And then another crew member then said that they never witnessed any formal orientation about weapons used on set, which normally would take place. So things that would call into question and presumably be the responsibility of the person in that head armorer position. And I guess assuming that those 2 things are true, based on what we know, it really would be the responsibility of the employer to take action. And that could be removing the employee from the position, increasing supervision over that employee, or terminating, in this case, the armorer's employment. So I think when we're looking at it from the liability, we had management that appeared to be aware. And then also at a minimum, we had Alec Baldwin, who was acting as an actor in that capacity, of course, but he also was a producer. So presumably on set when maybe some of those prior situations did occur. And so I do think that you could have a strong case there potentially for that negligent retention then as an employer as well. And so I will pause on that piece or maybe kick it over to Matt with a lot of that information, but more from the OSHA and the workplace safety standpoint as well.
Right. So with the OSHA and the safety standards, there's a few things that are going on here. Rust was a Western movie, or is a Western movie. So, and it was obviously well known that there were going to be firearms on the set. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to hire an armorer. And from the news reports and the report that there was no orientation about weapons use, weapon safety, or extra safety protocols when weapons were being used on set, that is a great concern and probably a violation of a couple of different OSHA standards, but certainly what is referred to as the general duty standard. So OSHA has all kinds of standards and regulations related to workplace safety. You know, for example, if you're on a construction site, you got to wear a hard hat, steel-toed boots, things of that nature. So we're kind of familiar with those, but there's also a general duty of an employer to protect against known hazards. So a known hazard might be, you know, if you're working in an area that is got slip or ice or things like that, that's a known hazard, and you need to be protecting your employees to the extent that you can, and certainly informing them of these dangers. If you are working on a movie set with weapons, that means having a weapons orientation, having safety protocols in place, having probably multiple people checking a weapon to see if it's loaded, to see if there's, you know, live rounds or if it's, you know, fake rounds, what have you. Having been in the military, the first thing they tell us about handling weapons is assume it's loaded until you yourself have proven that it's not. And there are reports that there was no weapons orientation for the actors using these weapons. That's a known hazard, and the producer is ultimately going to be responsible for ensuring that. The lack of checks would also go back to this sort of negligent hiring and unsafe workplace thing that we're dealing with. Somebody should have been checking the armorer's work when you're dealing with weapons. You know, it seems like it's common sense, but there's a lot of times where that common sense just gets lost. But in this case, Alec Baldwin's production company, if not Alec Baldwin himself, may be held liable for violations of various OSHA standards. And that's not even including whatever standards that the state of New Mexico may have had in place as well. So we're just looking at it from an OSHA standpoint. States may also have additional rules and regulations about workplace safety, particularly when you're dealing with firearms. So what does this mean for small businesses? Well, if you are a small business, you still have the general duty to make sure that your workplace is safe and to orient your staff about workplace dangers and to provide protective equipment, protective procedures as much as possible. Plus, what Laura was saying, there is the obligation to be reasonable in your hiring and retention of employees. So do you guys have anything else, any other lessons you think we should be helping small businesses remember?
I think we covered it.
So I want to thank Jen for bringing this idea up. This is a lot of fun. We hopefully will be doing some more of these as things go on. I know I've had a good time because you're not just looking at me anymore on the videos. So I kind of like that. But in the meantime, please check out our website. If you have any questions about workplace safety, about negligent hiring or retention, please give us a call. You can schedule consultations with us. You can go to the website, johnston-legal.com. We'll put a link down below. And in the meantime, go out and watch some live soccer. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.